Hello, everybody. This is Joe Harper with Reformed Truther Ministries. The title of today's video is Interacting with Falling Flat. Now, some of you may be asking, what is Falling Flat? Well, Falling Flat is the title of this book here, put out by Dr. Danny Faulkner. The title of this reads Falling Flat, and the subtitle, A Refutation of Flat Earth Claims. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to start to be getting into interacting with the arguments of this book. I really want to show that this book is not a helpful work. This is a critique. This is a pushback against the work of Dr. Danny Faulkner. And the reason why I've chosen to do this video is uh, there's a couple of reasons. One is I've experienced people saying that this book is essentially the gold standard of falling flat. In my experience, I've heard that this is the book that many evangelical pastors are using to try to refute flat earth. This is a book that I know that has been given to members of churches who tell their elders that they are members of churches. And it's very important that by interacting with this book, we're really interacting with arguments at the heart of the cosmology debate. So I think that this is going to be another reason why it's helpful to do this video is that if I can really start to break down some of what's in here, we're really getting to the heart of the debate as a whole on cosmology anyway. And this is an issue that in the past I haven't necessarily wanted to come back to time and time again. We've certainly covered it multiple times on this channel, but it gets to the point sometimes where if some people are so biased or so closed off to flat earth that they won't even concede the most basic of historical arguments or exegetical arguments. They don't want to give or concede any ground at all. I can think of an experience where I had a man who read my full book, or at least large excerpts of my book called The Hidden Enemies, where I have a whole chapter on flat earth in there, complete with church father quotes and all the rest of it. And this man, even after he was still saying, oh, the early church did not believe in that. And that's exactly the type of arguments we're going to get into today. And the point I'm trying to make is this is the reason why I haven't always wanted to come back to this is because some people, unfortunately, are so closed off to this issue, they won't even concede arguments you make, even when you provide documentation, even when you provide quotes. It's not enough for some people to get over this issue. So I want to be gracious in a sense today, but I also want to point out that I'm not going to pull my punches about this book, Falling Flat by Dr. Danny Faulkner. And I'm going to say this right from the get-go. I think that Danny Faulkner, who is an intelligent man, who does have a PhD, I believe that he does intentionally misrepresent flat Earth. I believe he uses strawmen, and that I will just say overall that his book is not a reliable source, and I think that he is not a reliable authority on the cosmology to debate. So today, he covers a lot of material in this book. I want to give this disclaimer. This book is turning to the end of it about 377 pages. So I obviously cannot cover all of this in around an hour. And by the way, I'm open to the idea of doing more on this book. So this may be a part one. Maybe I do have other projects I want to get to. So I don't know when a part two would happen. If that's something you guys would like to see, please let me know down in the comments. But today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to talk. We're going to start with the front cover. We're going to talk about the front cover. We're going to talk about the back cover. I'm going to read the table of contents, give you a summary of the book a little bit, and we're going to start to interact with some of his arguments. And me being really largely a history guy, I'm going to really focus in on how he represents some of these guys from church history today. I might get into his exegetical arguments a little bit too, but I want to show that he fails to accurately represent Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and Martin Luther. That's where we're going to start. That's really where we want to get down to brass tacks. And we're going to talk about how he just will not fairly or objectively portray the flat earth movement as a whole. So that's really the bread and butter of what today's video is about. And I want to give one more disclaimer that even though we're everything we're interacting with is in its proper context from the book, we are interacting with excerpts from different parts in the book. My friend Michelle Sandovich, she has done multiple reviews on this book, and she's really broken it down in parts. She's gone through all of chapter 1 and she's moved into chapter 2. We're going to read a little bit from one of her articles on her Substack today. So I'd really highly recommend going and reading her stuff. I'm going to leave a link to her material on Faulkner's book because that's a really important set of articles you can go read to get more on this. And I'm going to say today, this video, which I worked really hard to compartmentalize down to about an hour or so. This is a massive information dump. I tried really hard to get everything organized and presentable. So we're going to be reading quotes from excerpts from Faulkner's book today. And then I'm going to be reading quotations that refute him from actual source material. So there's just going to be a lot of reading today. And I know sometimes listening to a podcast or watching a YouTube video where people are reading lots of quotes can be a little bit hard to follow. It can be a little bit tiresome. But unfortunately for today's video, in order to properly interact with the arguments, that's just what we have to do. So that I'm giving that disclaimer up front. People can like that or not like that. That is their complete liberty to do what they want with that. But that being said, that's really where I want to start. And you may say, well, Joe, you said that he intentionally misrepresents flat Earth. He uses straw men. He's propping up false arguments that he can tear down. And just in general, he's not reliable. And you may say, well, that's not really fair to him. And as I was thinking about how I wanted to do this video, I was thinking, I want to respond to Faulkner with the appropriate amount of graciousness that he has applied to the flat Earth movement. So I just want to start today. I want to start with this title that he has of his book, the cover. And you see here, he has, this is the title he chose for his book. And he has a flat earth here with no solid firmament. The flat earthers up today, by and large, the vast majority of whether it's Christian flat earthers or even a lot of non-Christian flat earthers hold to a flat earth with a solid firmament over it. So we don't believe in the disk in space. Sometimes you see these memes of people throwing shade where like, oh, if you believed in flat earth, cats could push ships off the edge. Well, that's not what flat earthers today believe. So if you see somebody using that type of argumentation or even just in a mocking jest, bringing about that approach to people who believe in this, you can just graciously, respectfully, but still firmly say to them, look, that's not what they believe. That's not what we believe. But that is the picture that Faulkner used for the cover of his book. And I find this ironic. It's not out of ignorance that he did this, because if you turn to page, I believe it is 101. And what I'm going to show here, yep, right here, page 101. So you can see here in the book that he has the correct model here in the book, or more or less a picture of the correct model. He knows himself that flat earthers believe in a circle enclosed by a solid firmament, but he chooses to use this cover. And I'm going to share in the links a video from David Weiss. David Weiss is one of the most famous flat earthers today. And he has a little video where he talks about how Danny Faulkner, Dr. Danny Faulkner, came to a lot of the flat earth conferences where David Weiss and others were at. And he spoke with flat earthers, he interacted with them, he heard what they had to say, which that's all good. I'm glad that he would do that. And they all explained to him in length that they did not believe in this, and they told him what they in fact believe. But he still chose to use this book cover as his cover of his book. And even David Weiss in the video, you can go and watch it on your own times. I'm paraphrasing what he's saying. Weiss says, well, why did he says what I just said. He said, well, why did he use this as the cover of his book? That's really not fair. That's really not accurate. And when you know that Faulkner himself knows that, and he's a smart guy. Once again, he hears these arguments in length, and this is how he starts things off. You're already beginning to get a flavor of what he's trying to do or what his goals are. And I want to read, before we get into the introduction and the table of contents, I want to go to the back cover here and read the back cover. And like I said, I want to respond to this book with the amount of graciousness that he himself is willing to do. And basically what I'm saying is he's not been willing to be objective or fair in portraying flat earthers. He's trying to use straw men that he can easily pull down. So I'm going to respond with the exact same, now in honesty and objectivity, I'm going to be intellectually honest, but I'm say this is the game he's playing. We're going to just go right back at that. And he says here, right here, flat earth, flat wrong. So you're getting more of the flavor. We're going to read an excerpt here from him where he talks about how he says this is a threat to Christianity. So we're really starting to see that he doesn't have a lot of respect for the flat earth position. And his intention is to really try to drive this out of evangelical Protestant Christianity. And this is what the back cover says. There are people in the world today who believe the world is flat, and they are working very hard to convince everybody else that it's flat, even if it means distorting the truth to do that. In this book, you will learn how to refute flat earth claims and conspiracy theories with sound, historical, scientific, and biblical arguments. Okay, so I just want to point out here that in this section, he says flat earthers are distorting the truth to do it. So, okay, you may say, okay, that's here or there, but I just want to make sure we're reading this. Once again, you're getting a flavor of how he feels about flat earth. And then here's another part, another quotation. He says, unfortunately, as flat earth websites proliferated on the internet, thousands of people soon joined the movement. It's ironic that more people in the West today believe that the earth is flat than have in 2 millennia. This is an important quotation for him because we're going to see that essentially what he's going to try to do here is argue that, especially in regards to the Christian church, that with the exception of a few people, really the church has never taught this. He's trying to break down the argument that many Christian flat earthers have made that prior to Copernicus, many Christians have believed this. So we need to understand this. This is important. And we're going to see this today. This is really where I wanted to start because I consider the historical side of this kind of a little bit more in my area of expertise. Now, flat earthers would say that even though not everybody for the first 1,500 years of church history believed in flat earth, but many did. And I believe that the ancient Hebrews believed in flat earth and they taught flat earth. And there's been really good scholarship on this point to prove this. I would recommend looking into the works of Dr. Michael Heiser, and he himself pushed back against the flat earth position in the modern day. But Heiser had enough academic integrity to say, yes, the ancient Hebrews, during the times of the Bible being written, admitted to flat earth cosmology. And we're going to see here that Faulkner himself, he reads the quotation from Josephus in the 1st century. We're moving ahead here. Josephus talks about the crystalline firmament. So that's a quotation that you can use. And Faulkner also admits in his book that the Babylonian and Egyptians, by and large, believed in a flat earth. So he makes some concessions. And we're going to see here that when you read this book, he'll sometimes concede some of the arguments, but he always kind of twists things to either minimize things or not be objective to the arguments or tries to minimize or distort. It's funny, he accuses us of distorting. That's what I think he's doing. And he is trying to explain away legitimate arguments through tactics that some people have called sophistry. And you can look that up. That's deception, illusion, unfair, unobjective tactics. That's really what this book really is. But here, getting back to my point, I'm saying that I believe, as many flat earthers do, that then moving forward from the 1st century, the ancient Hebrews, as I said, believed in flat earth cosmology. We see that quoted in Josephus in the 1st century, moving forward. And then many of the patristics, a very large number of the patristics, believed in flat earth cosmology. And Faulkner will admit that Lactantius, that's a 4th century Latin Western church father, believed in it. And there was another man from the 6th century called Cosmas who did. He'll concede those too. But him, like many other modern evangelicals today, will try to say Augustine did not believe in that. In the Middle Ages, he claims that the entire church taught that the earth is spherical. And we're going to see that Thomas Aquinas in his writings talks about the solidity, the solid firmness of the firmament. And he claims that Luther was was a spherical geocentrist. And so he said his claim is basically that nobody has believed in this. And so what I'm saying is, hey, like many of these guys, like Augustine or Ambrose or Milan or Basil, believed in the solidity of the firmament. They talk about the waters above the firmament. And these are all things that are crucial to flat earth arguments. Because we believe that there is the flat circle of the earth, and then you have the dry land is the earth, and you have the seas, and it's a circle, usually surrounded by the ice wall that people have called Antarctica, and then there's this solid dome covering called the firmament above it. And the sun, the moon, and the stars are within the firmament, and the third heaven, which we would refer to as heaven, that's where God's throne is located above the firmament. That's the model. I know some of my friends say don't use the word model. Okay, that's what we believe as flat earthers. And that what we're going to see here is that for the first 1500 years until the time of Copernicus, that is what many Christians in the church believed. But Faulkner is trying to explain all that away. And we're going to see this as we get into the documentation. And we're going to see that that is something that he doesn't want to concede, that is not what he wants to admit. And so really, to really settle this debate, and I'm going to read a few sections from his book, which I think can be demonstratively disproven. What we're going to see here is that he's not being honest in how he's portraying some of these quotations from church history. So that's really where we want to start. But I want to read here, talking about his lack of trustworthiness. My friend Michelle Sandovich, she has here I'm reading this from my phone. This is one of her reviews. Danny Faulkner's Falling Flat. And if I click on this one, is her article called Falling Flat by Danny Faulkner, a cover to cover review. And so she's got the title there. And I'm going to read the specific portion I want to read from this. This is interesting because she actually emailed him and sent her articles to him. And how he responded is very, very interesting. I'm sorry, guys, that there's a lot of preamble for this one, but we just have to set the tone for things. Alrighty. So this is from Michelle's article, Falling Flat by Danny Faulkner, a cover-to-cover review. And this section here, it says, Faulkner's conversation on Facebook Messenger. You probably can't see that, but I'm going to include the link to this so you can read this for yourself. But this is very, very interesting because what she's going to be talking about here, and I'm going to share the video of this. Michelle talks about how at one point in a video that Danny Faulkner did with Justin Peters, Faulkner's actually got this Illuminati pyramid, which is an occult symbol, behind him on his shelf. And Justin Peters and Faulkner, because they collaborate together on some of these videos trying to refute flat Earth, and they say, oh, well, and Justin Peters is in a sarcastic tone, like, oh, everybody may think that you're a Mason. You better be careful with that behind you. And Faulkner goes, oh, I'll show you one better. And he actually pulls out a Masonic letter opener out of a jar that he was given as a gift. And you can watch the video for yourself, but these guys are essentially making light of and joking about the realities of Faulkner being potentially some type of a Freemason. Now, let me just say at this point, I don't know whether Danny Faulkner is a Freemason. I think the video certainly makes me even more suspicious of him, but I'm not going to say that I know that he is. But here's what I will say, guys. When you read about Freemasonry, it is a pagan, anti-Christian secret society. We've talked about this at length. You are required to take blood-curdling oaths that are clearly sinful. It is clearly a violation of what the Bible teaches about not being unequally yoked together with other religions, and their set of teachings is in itself a set of religious teachings. They don't call it a religion, but it's teaching you a non-biblical worldview that is syncretistic. And the further you go up, it leads you into Gnosticism. That's what Illuminism is, the Illuminati, Illuminism. And then ultimately, it leads you up to Luciferian when you get up to the 30th degree, 31st degree, 32nd degree, 33rd degree. So for these guys to be making light of this. Let's just say we're taking them at their words to be making light of this. They're saying, oh, these people are conspiracy theories. They're trying to mock and ridicule people who are aware of the realities of the secret society. That's not how a Christian should be talking about those things. I believe that if you are a member of a Christian church and you are caught being a member of a Masonic lodge, you should be disciplined. And if you do not repent of that and publicly recant that, and say that I have nothing more to do with this, you should be excommunicated from your church. That would be a proper use of church discipline. So for these guys to be making fun of this and ridiculing it makes Faulkner even more suspicious. Now that being said, let me read Michelle's conversation with Faulkner on Facebook Messenger. Here's my conversation with Faulkner after my TFE article went live. Me, this is Michelle. Hi, Danny. My husband wanted me to share this with you. I hope you take it to heart. And then she has the link to one of her articles. Flat Out Hope Substack, does the final experiment settle things? That's the article that she sent to Danny Faulkner. And then Danny Faulkner responds by saying, thank you for sending your essay to me. I'm working my way through reading it. However, one thing caught my attention, commenting on a video clip you wrote. In case you're not able to watch the video, Faulkner admits to using occult and Freemasonic symbols with the intent to deceive flat earthers into thinking he is a Freemason. I did not admit to any such thing. Perhaps that is your understanding of or spin on what I said, but I did not, in your words, admit such a thing. What you wrote is a misrepresentation of what I said. And then Michelle responds, I will allow the readers to decide that, which is why I included the clip. Thank you for responding. You call them, quote, little Easter eggs, I believe. I will, however, do a follow-up and state your objections. Let me say at this point, if Faulkner doesn't, if he's not affiliated with this, then why is he like flirting with this? Why is he including these little Easter eggs in his video? And I'm going to include the video to that so you can watch that too. So for a Christian, you should not want to be you shouldn't even want to give off the appearance of evil. You shouldn't even want to appear to be affiliated with this. You shouldn't even want to cause confusion. So it's strange. Once again, I'm not saying that dogmatically that he is. That's not my purpose, but I'm saying this is very, very strange and suspicious behavior. That's not unfair to say. But then Faulkner continues and he says, thank you. But I think that you need to go further. You said in your essay that I misrepresented the flat earth position. You can't accuse me of that. I'm misrepresenting what I said. Many people will not bother to listen to what I actually said and simply assume that you correctly represented what I said. If you cannot recognize this, then we are at an impasse. And then Michelle responded, I said I would offer your view on the topic. Since what you seem to say on that video is what I represent, can you please clarify what you meant to say? In other words, I do not feel that I misrepresented you. However, if you'd like to clarify your position, I'm open to listening and presenting that view alongside mine. Since you are misrepresenting the flat earth position or biblical cosmology, people will have to weigh the evidence and draw their own conclusions. And then Faulkner says, I don't feel that I have misrepresented the flat earth position. And then Michelle says, you may not feel that way, but I can demonstratively prove it, which makes you unqualified to be a spokesman against it. And if you are open to learning the true position, then that's another topic. And if Faulkner says, let me hear your proof, and she says, I have shared enough proof in my article. So you can go and read all of her reviews. She goes into a lot of detail to prove, once again, that Faulkner is misrepresenting this book, misrepresenting the position. And I'm going to do a little bit that here for that as well today. So that gives a lot of insight into really where Faulkner is kind of how he's operating, what he's doing. And like I said before, I'm sorry that it's taking a while to get into this, but we just got to set the correct foundation for doing this properly. So let me summarize the contents of the book. So chapter 1, he says, why write about flat earth? We're going to read a little bit from that here in just a second. Chapter 2, the Bedford level experiment in the Chicago skyline. Chapter 3, eclipses in the flat earth. Chapter 4, aspects of the sky in flat earth. Chapter 5, astronomy in flat earth. Chapter 6, physics in the flat earth. Chapter 7, geocentrism in the flat earth. Chapter 8, NASA in the flat earth. Chapter 9, miscellaneous claims about the flat earth. And chapter 10, does the Bible teach flat earth? chapter 11, how did a dome, flat earth cosmology get imported into the Bible? Chapter 12, the book of Enoch and flat earth, and then chapter 13 is his conclusions. So what I'm going to be focusing on today really gets into, I'm going to really be focusing on things he wrote in chapter 1, chapter 10, and 11, focusing primarily on his church history arguments because he includes scientific arguments, historical arguments, and biblical arguments. So this book's got a lot of stuff in it. So once again, everything I'm taking is in context, but that's the stuff we're going to be focusing on for the rest of this time. But I want to read a little bit from chapter 7 and 8. This is chapter 1. And I wanted you to see how he calls flat earth a threat to Christianity. So if you think that I'm being unfair in attacking him, once again, just remember, this is how he's writing about this position. He's not conceding any grace or respect. He doesn't want there to be any respectability to this position. He's saying this is a bunch of wacky conspiracy theorists. So if we can say, hey, there's something to this, this is something that's a little bit objective and fair, then we're already seeing that he's not being fair in representing the position, just like my friend Michelle said. So that being said, let's start here at the top of page 7. Many people probably wonder why it is necessary to write a book about the flat earth. After all, didn't we settle the question more than 5 centuries ago when Christopher Columbus proved that the earth is round? Well, no, Columbus didn't settle that question, and therein lies a major part of the problem, but more on that later. Beginning around 2012, there has been a major resurgence in interest in the flat earth. Much of this was started by Eric Dubay, who began posting on the internet and published 2 books on the subject, The Flat Earth Conspiracy and 200 Proofs that the Earth is Not a Spinning Ball. Soon, others took up the cause and a movement was born. Much of this has been promoted on the internet, particularly through social media. Some of the more prominent leaders in the Flat Earth movement are Mark Sargent, Geran Campanella, Robbie Davidson, and Rob Skiba. The last 2 are notable because they promote a Christian version of Flat Earth based on their understanding of the cosmology of the Bible. There is a wide diversity of theological beliefs within the Flat Earth movement: conservative Christians, New Agers, deists, and pantheists, to name a few. Flat Earthers often remark that there are no atheists in their ranks. I suppose that's because the Flat Earth model is so contrived. No one could seriously suggest that it evolved. That's interesting that he calls it contrived, but we'll move forward. However, to believe that there is a creator doesn't necessarily lead one to faith in Jesus Christ, or that matter, a belief in the Bible. That's interesting too, but we'll keep going. In this book, I will be most concerned about the Christian version of the Flat Earth movement because I see it as a great threat to true Christianity today. I want to provide answers for people who then, when confronted with arguments that the earth is flat, may not know how to respond. Since I learned about the Flat Earth movement in February of 2016, I have conducted extensive study on the phenomenon. I have read numerous books on the subject, read much material online. I've watched far more videos about the flat earth on the internet than I'd care to admit. I also attended the first International Flat Earth Conference in November of 2017, as well as the second one in 2018. I'm confident that this study, combined with my knowledge of astronomy and physics, as well as my understanding of the aspects of the sky developed over a half century as a serious student of the sky, uniquely qualifies me to tackle this task. Since the Christian version of flat earth cosmology is ostensibly built upon a biblical foundation, I must respond to the biblical arguments put forth for a flat earth as well. I doubt that other theological positions within the flat earth movement will be interested in that part. And then he says, I will discuss some topics relative to the Bible in this chapter. However, I will defer a fuller discussion of biblical passages that allegedly teach the earth is flat until chapters 10 and 11. So there you're seeing himself. As I said, I'm going to focus on stuff he says in chapter 1, 10, and 11. He himself is saying that's what he believes is the most important part of his book, and also that's where those arguments are. So I want to make sure you guys hear that because I don't want to be unfairly accused of cherry picking. That's why I'm going into a lot of length to set this up more than I probably normally would, because I've been in these arguments before and I know the weeds that you can quickly get in. With that being said, I'm going to turn here to, let's go to page 30 and 31. Excuse me. So we're going to start here with what he says about, we're going to really start here with Augustine. So I'm going to paraphrase here, but all right, let me read this from page 30. He says, let me reiterate that historically, the cosmology of the church was geocentric, but not flat earth. Okay, so there we go. That's what I said earlier. That's kind of the foundation for this whole video right there, is that statement. He's saying nobody really believed in this. Yeah, they may have believed that the earth did not move, but it was a sphere in space. That's what he wants to portray. And even that is something that creation ministries like today, Answers in Genesis, they actually push very hard against geocentrism as much as they do against flat earth too, which is a whole other rabbit hole. But basically what Faulkner's trying to say is, look, essentially nobody believes in this. Let me read this again. Let me reiterate that historically the cosmology of the church was geocentric but not flat earth. The medieval scholar Geoffrey Burton Russell's 1991 book, Inventing the Flat Earth, Columbus and Modern Historians, is a detailed refutation of the flat earth myth. Admittedly, there were two individuals in the history of the church worthy of note that did indeed teach that the church was flat. One was Lactantius, an early 4th century Berber who eventually became an advisor to Constantine. In chapter 24 of book 3 of his Divine Institutes, Lactantius mocked those who believed that the earth was spherical. The other was Cosmas in Dicopletus, a Greek from Alexandria who in the early 6th century made several voyages to India and Ceylon. He later wrote Christian Topography, in which he argued that the earth was flat and rectangular. The heaven above was shaped like a box with a curved lid. He took his contemporary Christians to task for believing that the earth was spherical and claiming that the spherical earth was pagan inspired. That is evidence that Christians at the time generally believed the earth to be a globe, for why would one criticize a belief that did not exist? Neither Lactantius nor Cosmas are known for anything else. It's if not for their odd ideas about the earth's shape, they would be more obscure than they already are. In the 19th century, critics falsely portrayed the teachings of Lactantius and Cosmic as typical of the early and modern church. Sadly, modern flat earthers have unquestionably accepted this fox history created by the critics. All right, couple things here. First off, if you actually, Lactantius is not one of the most well-known church fathers today, but in the Latin West, he was considered a very respected church father. I'm not saying that means that I'm endorsing everything he wrote. You know that the church fathers, they're kind of a mixed bag, and we know this as Protestants in general. There's many things that you read, whether it's Augustine or Chrysostom or any of these guys. There's many things that we give the hearty amen to, and then we think there's other matters where later theologians like Luther, Calvin, or the Puritans are clearer. So I'm not. But Lactantius, he's saying that he's portraying these two guys as kind of odd quacks, but when he says if not for their ideas about the Earth's shape, they would be far more obscure than they already are. He's kind of minimizing who these guys were. These were important guys. But we've seen here his quote about what he's saying. He's saying basically, except for these two guys, nobody else believed it. Now, I want to say at this point, okay, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Hebrews, they did believe in an ancient flat Earth cosmology. And if I need to document this more, I can always in a later video go back to that and provide more documentation for that. Now the Greeks is hard because the Greek civilization existed for centuries. And yes, Plato and Aristotle, they did begin to introduce the round earth beliefs into the world. And moving forward in history, by the time that we get to the patristic era, there were some people who believed in that. So that's important for our point. But we're just trying to pull down that basically we're trying to pull down Faulkner's argument that this idea was essentially completely absent from the Christian church. So we're not saying that nobody believed in the sphere, just as he's trying to say, well, essentially nobody believed that the earth is flat. But we're going to try to show that this was a lot more commonly attested than what Faulkner is letting on. Then he comes to Augustine here. The critics even claim that Augustine taught that the earth was flat when he clearly thought otherwise. The relevant portion of Augustine's writing is chapter 9 of book 16 on his city of God. The entire chapter reads, a lot of reading here. But as to the fable that there are antipodes, that is to say, men on the opposite side of the earth, where the sun rises and when it sets to us, men who walk on their feet opposite to ours, that is on no ground credible. And indeed, it is not affirmed that this has been learned by historical knowledge, but by scientific conjecture, on the ground that the earth is suspended from the concavity of the sky, and it has much room on the other side as it has on the other. Hence that they say the part which is beneath us must be inhabited. But they do not remark that although it must be supposed or scientifically demonstrated that the world is of a round and spherical form, yet it does not follow that on the other side of the earth is bare of water. Nor even though it be bare, does not immediately follow that it is peopled. For Scripture, which proves the truth of historical statements by the accomplishment of its prophecies, gives no false information. It is too absurd to say that some men might have taken ship or traversed the whole wide open and crossed from this side of the world to the other, and thus even the inhabitants of the distant region are descended from one man. Wherefore, let us seek if we can find the city of God that sojourns on the earth among those human races who are catalogued as having been divided into 72 nations and as many languages. For it is continued down to the deluge in the ark, it is proved it existed still among the Son of God and by their blessings. And chiefly in the eldest son Sem, for Japheth received this blessing so that he could dwell in the tents of Shem. So that's Augustine, which Faulkner quotes. Now listen to what Faulkner says. He's saying, Augustine believed that the earth is spherical. He just didn't believe there were people living on the other side of the world. Listen to this. This is Faulkner now. The context established by the adjoining chapters is the repopulation of the world after the flood and the confusion of languages at the Tower of Babel. Here, Augustine concludes that there are no antipodes. Many people incorrectly assume that the antipodes refer to locations on the other side of the spherical earth, and so erroneously conclude that Augustine's rejection of the antipodes amounts to a rejection of the earth being spherical. However, Augustine defined the antipodes as men on the opposite side of the earth, unquote. The word antipode means opposite feet, coming from the idea of people from the opposite side of the earth would have their feet oriented opposite to him. Furthermore, if Augustine had intended that the antipodes mean the opposite side of the earth, the singular form of the antipode would have been appropriate. The fact he used the plural is consistent with the proper interpretation. Augustine went on to state that the argument for the existence of the antipodes was conjecture based on the scientifically established fact that the earth is spherical. You see, that's where he just put his little assumption right in there. See what he's trying to do? This is a bait and switch, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to disprove it. Here, Augustine reflects the geography of his day that Europe, Asia, and Africa comprise the only significant landmass on the earth, though he doesn't explicitly state it. Augustine here also reflected the widespread belief of the ancient world that it was too hot in the tropics for man to safely traverse the tropics to reach any land on the other side of the earth. Given the huge stature of Augustine in the medieval church, it is inconceivable that later students would have abandoned belief that the earth is spherical. So I'm going to stop there. So see what he said there. He's saying Augustine is rejecting the notion that people live on the other side of the world. But he's also saying Augustine, in line with everybody else at that time, believed that the earth was a sphere. Well, I think that we should point out at this point, and I've already given my summary of flat earth beliefs. Augustine believed, as many flat earthers do today, he believed in a flat plane where when in the book of Genesis, the dry land is referred to as the earth, the waters surround it, and he believed that the the firmament was a solid surface that was a dome encasing that. And he believed that the heavenly bodies were found within it. And he believed that the firmament separated the waters below, surrounding the dry land, and the waters above. And to prove this, I have this quotation here, and he refers to a solid firmament in this. This is the fathers of the church, St. Augustine, on Genesis. And this little book here actually has a few books. It has 2 books on Genesis against the Manichees, and then also his literal interpretation of Genesis, an unfinished book. So we're going to read from this. Excuse me. And what we're going to do here is we're going to read a quotation from Augustine, which shows that we've already seen that he rejects this idea of people on the other side of the world. Faulkner's claiming, oh, that's still in the context of a spherical earth. Well, when we read his quotations on the solid nature of the firmament and the waters above, that's not in line with the spherical earth cosmology. That's in line with the flat earth cosmology that's been laid out by biblical flat earthers today. All right. So this is in this book here that we're reading, it's chapter 8, paragraph 30, page 166. This book's available. I bought this off at Amazon, by the way. So this is something that you can read. And I've also seen PDFs of this online. So this material is available to read. But the quotation I'm going to read here, it talks about how he believes that this firmament divides the waters above from the waters below. And listen to how he says that the firmament of the heaven is corporeal. In other words, it's material, it's solid. When he talks about incorporeal, that's spiritual. Corporeal is material. So he's talking about a material firmament. This is very important. And God said, let there be a firmament in the middle of the water, and let it divide the waters. And so it was done. And after it was said, and so it was done, what need was there to add? And God made the firmament and divided the water that was below the firmament from the water that was above the firmament. And when it was said above, and God said, let there be light, and light was made. And it did not add, and God made the light. But hereafter it is said, and God said, let it be done, and so it was done. It adds, and God made. Does this make it clear that we should not understand that light was corporeal, lest it seem that God, I mean God the Trinity, made it by the interposition of some creature? But this firmament of the heaven is corporeal. We should believe that it has received beauty and form through the incorporeal creature. The truth then would have impressed upon the incorporeal nature in a way suited to reason, what the latter impressed in a way suited the bodies that there might come to be the firmament of heaven. And thus it was added, and God said, let there be, and so it was done. Perhaps there was something produced in the rational nature, and from it was impressed upon the body. So I know that Augustine's writing, ancient writers, they write very different from modern writers today. So I know that you got to really pull out the meat from what he's saying. But the significant portion here is where he's talking about, he says, because this firmament of the heaven is corporeal. So that's really where he's saying it's referring to something material, something solid. And then other portions really get into this more. All right, guys, here's a couple more excerpts from Augustine. And this next excerpt is once again from his literal meaning of Genesis commentary. And this particular part that I'm going to read is referring to when God creates the lights, the greater light and the lesser light, the stars, and places them into the heavens. So we're seeing that Augustine believed that the heavens are placed underneath the firmament. And you got to understand that firmament, Augustine with the firmament, he does believe in the solid dome covering, but he also will refer to this as, because it's referred to in the text of Scripture as heaven, he'll sometimes kind of also talk about that as what's going under there as well. And here you see this. And he says, and God said, let there come to be lights in the firmament of the heaven. So he talks about, he does refer to the solid structure, but he also talks about what's in the firmament. So I just want to make sure we avoid confusion on that point. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to give light, The scriptures say this only of the two fixed stars, or also of those which move. The two lights, the greater and lesser, are counted among the movable stars. How then were they all made in the firmament when all the movable ones have their own orbits or revolutions? We read in the scriptures that there are many heavens and one heaven, and in this passage, when the firmament is also called heaven, should we take scripture of speaking of this whole ethereal machine that holds all the stars? Beneath it there thrives the serenity of the pure and peaceful air, beneath which is this turbulent and stormy air is blown about, to give light upon the earth and divide the day and the night. To give light upon the earth and divide the day and night. Had God not already divided light and darkness, and called the light day, and also called the darkness night? The earlier text made it clear that he divided the day and the night. What then does it mean when it says of the lights to divide the day and the night? Or was this division by the lights now made so that even men who were using only carnal eyes for contemplation of these things might know it? Did God make this division before the revolutions of light so that only a few with the Holy Spirit and serene reason could see it? Or did God divide the day and night from each other? That is, that the beauty which he imposed upon that formlessness from the lack of form which still remained to be formed. Quite another is this day and night, whose change is marked by the turn of heaven. It could not come about except by the rising and setting of the sun. And then he goes in to talk about the signs of the suns. Well, you see here, I want to point out how he talks about how the lights are placed in the firmament or under the firmament. That's really what we're going to pull out of this. He says, how then were they all made in the firmament? That's what he does believe that. We read that in the full context. And then the other part here where he says that they are. Should we then take the scriptures as speaking of this whole ethereal machine that holds all the stars? Beneath it there thrives the serenity of pure and peaceful air. So you see here how he says, let me read that one more time. He says, we read in the scripture that there are many heavens and one heaven, and in this passage when the firmament is also called heaven. So he's saying all of this can be called the heaven or the firmament. And then he says that the air and everything we know is under the firmament. So that's not really aligning with a spherical cosmology. And I'm going to read one more quote here from the Confessions. This is from the pretty well known, you always see theologians with the big church fathers set, which I have too. And so this is from that same set. And this is the Nicene and Post-Nicene Fathers, Volume 1. And this is Augustine. And it has his confessions. And the quote I'm going to read here is from Book 13, chapter 22, I believe. So this should be pretty good. And this quote is basically at the end of the Confessions, pretty close to the end. So I'm hoping that all this is giving some insight. And there's a lot more digging that could be pulled out on Augustine. I mean, if you read the article by Paul H. Seeley, where he talks about the firmament, that article is posted in the Westminster Theological Journal. He talked about how Augustine believed in an impassable boundary between the waters above and the waters below. There's a lot more quotes we could pull out. I'm just trying to summarize it all. But as I'm turning to this here, let me get there. Like I said today, a lot of quotes. Not 22, chapter. So yeah, this is book 13, chapter 32. And this says, of the particular works of God, more especially of man. And he says, this is Augustine. Thanks to thee, O Lord, we behold the heaven and the earth, whether the corporeal part, superior and inferior, or the spiritual and corporeal creature. And in the embellishment of these parts, whereof the universal mass of the world, or the universal creation consisteth, we see light made, and it divideth from the darkness. We see the firmament of heaven, whether the primary body of the world between the spiritual waters, upper waters, and the corporeal lower waters, or because this also is called heaven, this expanse of air through which wander the fowls of heaven, between the waters which are in vapors borne above them, and which clear nights drop below the dew, those which being heavy flow along the earth. We behold the waters gathered together through the plains of the sea, and dry land both void and formed, so as to be visible and compact in the light matter of herbs and trees. We behold the light shining from above, the sun to serve the day, and the moon and the stars to cheer the night, and that by all these time should be marked and noted. We behold on every side a human element fruitful with fishes, beasts, and birds, because of the density of the air which brings up the flights of birds is increased by the exhalation of the waters. We behold the face of the earth, interesting, furnished with terrestrial creatures and man, created after thy image and likeness, in that very image and likeness of thee. That is the power of reason and understanding, on account which he was set over all irrational creatures. And in his soul there was one power which rules by directing, and another made subject that it might obey. So also, for man was corporeally made a woman, who in the mind of her rational understanding should have also a like nature in the sex, however, of her body, should be in the manner subject to the sex of her husband, as the appetite of action is subjected by the reason of the mind to conceive the skill of acting rightly. These things we behold, they are severely good and very good. So it's interesting. He even mentions here, we behold the face of the earth. But he talks about the waters above, and he talks about the birds flying in the expanse between the waters above and the waters below. At one point, he does seem to allude to the air, the watery air. So there's some questions there, but we see here that this is a very good description of what Augustine believed. This is a very short, succinct view of his view of creation. We see the firmament of heaven, whether in the primary body of the world between the spiritual upper waters and the corporeal lower waters. Because this is also called heaven, the expanse of air through which wander the fowls of heaven, between the waters which are in the vapors borne above them, and the clear nights which drop down in the dew. And behold, being heavy flow upon the earth. We behold the waters gathered together through the plains of the sea and the dry land. And he also mentions the face of the earth. So we see waters below, surrounding, we got the dry land, we have the waters below the seas, we have heaven, the firmament is referred to as heaven, we got the birds flying in the heaven, we got the sun, moon, and the stars in the heaven, we have the dome, we got the waters above. And even we could ask questions of how we could get into more specifics about how did Augustine specifically articulate things with the firmament and the water above. I know there's a lot more that could be said on this. This is not supporting a round earth cosmology, but we're going to move forward to Aquinas and to Luther, just to not get too caught in the weeds here. So returning to Faulkner's book now. All right, so to cover Thomas Aquinas next, we need to understand what Faulkner has already said about his belief that the medieval church taught a round earth cosmology. So now I've scrolled ahead to chapter 10. This is page 267 of Faulkner's book. As he says here, as the medieval scholar Geoffrey Burton Russell ably demonstrated, contrary to common misconception, the medieval church did not teach that the earth was flat. Thomas Aquinas introduced Aristotelian thought into medieval church teaching. Written in the 4th century BC, Aristotle clearly taught that the earth was spherical. In the 2nd century BC, Aristophanes accurately measured the circumference of the spherical earth. That's not proven. That's something for a different day. Claudius Ptolemy's Almagest from the early 2nd century provided a useful model for calculating the positions of the heavenly bodies. While this model was geocentric, it did not promote a flat earth, but instead was based upon a spherical earth. the works of Aristotle, Aristophanes, and Ptolemy were all widely available and discussed in the middle and late medieval period and continued to be through the transition of the Renaissance. Given the clear record of history, why is it so commonly believed today that most people, and especially the church, thought that the earth was flat? Well, this is where a lot of historical revisionism is. Even if you go to our parents' and our grandparents' generation, they were taught, even though they were taught that the earth is a globe, they were taught that the ancient church and the medieval people did believe that. Now, I believe, in my opinion, that as there's revisionism going on, not just with the details surrounding the debate of cosmology itself, but even with the history going on here. And once again, well, how are we going to disprove this? We're going to go directly to Aquinas' writings in the Summa Theologica, and we're going to prove that he held to a solid firmament. Now, let me say at this point, yes, Thomas Aquinas did employ Aristotelian thought heavily in his writings. He really took his theology, that medieval Roman Catholic theology, and he took Aristotelian thought and he merged it together. And this has been well known for students of Thomas Aquinas for a long time now. And even it's interesting because right now in Reform circles, there's a resurgence of study in Thomas Aquinas, and we even have certain people converting to Roman Catholicism. I actually want to cover that at some point in a later video. But Aquinas here on creation, there's certain points where you can read Aquinas and he can be helpful. If you read him on the attributes of God, you know, uh, God's essence, the simplicity of God, the Trinity. There's things you can glean that's not going to lead you into the errors of Roman Catholicism. And ironically, here, what he writes on creation is actually going to be helpful. But I digress. That's a that's a different topic. But what we want to see here is that what Faulkner is saying that is once again demonstrably able to be proved to be wrong, just because Aquinas relied on Aristotle, and yes, Aristotle did talk about a spherical earth in his writings, does not mean that Aquinas mimicked him on his view of creation. That's where Faulkner's error is. This is either through ignorance or this is through bait and switch. That we can leave that up to him and others to judge. So right here, I have this is the basic writings of Thomas Aquinas, and all this is it's not the entirety of his Summa Theologica, but this is a large portion of it. This is, and we're going to be quoting from the Summa Theologica. It's question 68. So people can go and they can read this on their own time. This is an accurate translation. So as I'm turning to this, we're going to see here in this section that Aquinas explicitly talks about the solid nature of a firmament. And it's this excerpt that we're going to read is interesting because he even explicitly denies those people that say that the firmament is the air, which is funny because other writers are not as clear on that, and I actually think Aquinas here is pretty helpful on it. So this is something that I found to actually be really helpful because even some of these other writers like Augustine or Luther, sometimes they're not as clear on some, even though they're there and we're representing their views accurately, they're not always clear on all these details as much as they want to be. But when you read Aquinas here on the firmament, he's very solid. That's ironic. He's solid on the solidity of the firmament. So this is very helpful. All right. So this is the Summa Theologica, question 68, second article, whether there be waters above the firmament. And I'm going to read here just one little portion out of this. Where do I want to start to get this? He says, this is what Aquinas says, replying to, we understand the firmament. He's replying to the idea that the firmament is just a part of the air where clouds are collected. He says, if, however, we understand by the firmament that part of the air in which the clouds are collected, then the waters above the firmament must rather be vapors resolved from waters which are raised above a part of the atmosphere and from which the rain falls. But to say, as do some writers alluded to by Augustine, that waters resolved into vapor may be lifted above the starry heaven is a mere absurdity. The solid nature of the firmament, the intervening region of fire wherein all vapor must be consumed, consumed, the tendency in light and rarefied bodies to drift to one spot beneath the vault of the moon, as well as the fact that vapors are perceived not to rise even to the tops of mountain, all go to show the impossibility of this. Nor is it less absurd to say that in support of this opinion that bodies may be rarefied infinitely, since natural bodies cannot be infinitely rarefied or divided, but to a certain point only. So he if you read all of this in its context, it's very clear that he, as he just said, affirms a solid firmament, and there's waters above the firmament and waters below the firmament. So Thomas Aquinas is somebody who you cannot say held to a spherical earth alongside the whole medieval church. You have to, from the text of his scripture, he clearly held to a flat earth covered by a solid firmament with waters above and the heavenly bodies within it. And I actually think that what he writes here is as clear as anybody as you're going to read on this. So that's actually very helpful. He says here at one point, we must hold then these waters to be material, but their exact nature will be differently defined according as opinions of the firmament differ. For if by firmament we understand the starry heaven, and if we understand it as being the nature of the four elements, for the same reason it may be believed that the waters above the heaven are of the same nature as the elemental waters. But if by firmament we understand the starry heaven not, however, as being of the nature of the four elements, then the waters above the firmament will be of the same nature as the elemental waters. Rather, just according to Strabo, one heaven is called empyrean, that is fiery solely because of its splendor. So this other heaven, which is above the starry heaven, will be called aqueous solely because of its transparency. Again, if the firmament is held to be of a nature other than the elements, it may still be said to divide the waters. If we understand by water not the element of this formless matter, Augustine in fact says that whatever divides bodies from bodies can be said to divide waters by waters. If we, however, understand the firmament, and then he goes to read that part I just read about, if we understand by the firmament to be that part of the air wherein clouds are collected, then the waters must be, et cetera, what I just read. He says that it's an absurdity because of the solid nature of the firmament. So he's saying, basically what Aquinas is saying is, hey, there's different views of this. There's speculation about how all this works, but he's saying he believes in the solid nature of the firmament, and those waters are up there. And this is clearly something that's been mysterious to even some of the most brilliant minds in church history. But what we're trying to do in this video is say that for Faulkner to make these dogmatic claims about what these guys believed and to say, oh, they all held to a spherical earth, there's no legitimacy to the flat earth position at all from church history, that is inaccurate. So that's really where we got to go there. So we're going to proceed to Martin Luther. Now, Martin Luther is somebody that is one of the most important Protestant reformers, someone who's respected. So getting his views right on this is very, very important. So now I'm going back to page 34. So now I'm going back to chapter 1. Now I did that. I went back and forth just to get the chronicle. I'm going chronologically. Augustine, Aquinas. Now we're coming up to Luther. So we see here, this is what Faulkner says on Luther. In his commentary on Genesis, I'm going to read that, by the way, Martin Luther certainly indicated that the earth is spherical. He frequently referenced Aristotle in his commentary. Aristotle clearly taught that the earth was spherical, which if Luther disagreed with this, there was ample opportunity to express that. That's an argument from silence. Many flat earthers confuse this matter by referencing to a quote attributed to Luther in his table talk number 4638, dated June 4, 1539, we find there was a mention of a certain new astrologer who wanted to prove that the earth moves and not the sky, the sun, and the moon. This would be as if somebody were riding on a cart or on a ship, that he was standing still while the earth and the trees were moving, Luther remarked. So it goes now that whoever wants to be clever must agree with nothing what others esteem. He must do something of his own. This is what the fellow does who wishes to turn the whole of astronomy upside down. Even in these things, they're thrown into disorder. I believe the Holy Scriptures, for Joshua commanded the sun to stand still and not the earth. And Faulkner, commenting on the Luther quote, he says, again, notice this quote is in reference to the question of whether the earth moves and not the shape of the earth. Flat earthers persist in confusing these two issues. Though Copernicus is mentioned by name, Copernicus is the astrologer mentioned. Astronomers were often called astrologers back then, for the two were mingled at the time. This table talk, number 4638, from June 4, 1539, 4 years prior to the publication of Copernicus' book, apparently Copernicus had been discussing the heliocentric model for a while, and the news of this had spread across Europe. Note that Luther first objected on the grounds that while Copernicus proposed would overturn the whole of astronomy. This is true, as most people in the West, including Luther, subscribed to Aristotelian Ptolemaic cosmology, which was geocentric. But the cosmology was not flat Earth, and many flat earthers consistently and erroneously seem to think. Luther's scriptural basis for rejection was secondary. However, we must note that table talks were not penned by Luther, rather, they were recollections by others of informal conversations published 20 years after Luther's death, and this particular conversation occurred nearly 30 years before publication. One must wonder how accurately this attribution reflects Luther's thought on the matter. So, okay, a lot there. Um, let's just assume the quote is accurate. It's the table talks are not. Some of what Faulkner's saying is because that is recollections of things he said in social settings. Faulkner is right on that, but he also, to be fair, he even kind of concedes, yeah, Luther probably said that. So we'll just leave that. But basically, what Faulkner's argument is he's saying, look, Luther was geocentric, spherical. He wasn't a flat earther. And then he says, oh, in his commentary on Genesis, he would have had every opportunity to refute Aristotle, who held to a sphere. That's an argument from silence. That's not very helpful. So that being said, we're going to go to his commentary, Luther's commentary on Genesis, and we're going to read some explicit sayings. Now, the caveat here we got to give about Luther. I believe Luther held to a flat earth cosmology, but he's not as clear on the solidity of the firmament as other guys. And I do believe that he talks about the spheres of the heavens being in the firmament of the heavens and moving around the earth. I think he even believed that things went under the earth. So there's a lot there that is Luther isn't as clear on all these details as he should be, but he also explicitly says that he doesn't pretend to know everything perfectly. We're going to see he affirms the waters above. He talks about the dry land being in the center, and he talks about the waters below being the waters surrounding the dry land. He refers to all of this as the household of God. And he refers to the heaven as the roof and the earth as the floor. So he actually lays out a very explicit model for the world. He doesn't refer to it as a sphere. He's describing the dry land as the center, the ocean surrounding it, that's the sides, and he talks about the heaven as the roof of this house. That's how he's illustrating this. And for the Luther quotation I'm going to read, I took the relevant excerpt from his commentary on Genesis, and I actually posted it in the article sections of the RTM website. And this full commentary is available on the Gutenbergpress.com. So you can go and read this. This is available to read. This is public domain. This should be something that should be easy for people to get at. And you can do what I did, read it very slowly, very meticulously, and you can judge whether I'm right or whether Faulkner is right. But that being said, let me pull this up here. And we're going to read this. And this is really the last thing I want to get at today, where I've already tried to prove that basically Faulkner, how he represents Augustine, Aquinas, and now Luther, is not reliable. And we've also shown how he portrays flat earthers in general is not reliable. We're seeing that this book, and we haven't even gotten that far into some of the other arguments, is just not a reliable work. Okay, so here's what Luther wrote. And we're going to start here with the first part here is taken from the section called God's Work on the Second Day in his commentary. And then we're going to scroll down and read some excerpts from God's Work on the Third Day. So I'm trying to make sure that you guys know where this is coming from. But this is what Luther says. And he says, but we Christians ought to meditate and think on these things and their causes differently from the philosopher, although there are some things which are beyond our comprehension. For instance, that these waters that are, quote, above, unquote, the firmament, all such things are rather to be believed with the confession of our ignorance than profanely denied. or arrogantly interpreted according to our shallow comprehension. It behooves us ever to adhere to the phraseology of the Holy Scriptures and to stand by the very words of the Holy Spirit, whom it is pleased in the sacred narrative by his servant Moses to arrange the different parts of the great work of creation as to place in the midst of the firmament, unquote, formed out of the original mass of unshapen heaven and earth, and then stretched out and expanded by the words. And then to represent some waters as being, quote, above, unquote, the firmament, and other waters as being, quote, under, unquote, the firmament. Both waters also formed of the same original rude, undigested matter. And the whole part of this creation is called by the Holy Spirit the heaven, together with its seven spheres and the whole region of the air, in which meteors and signs of fire, in which the wandering fowls make their home. So I'll stop there for that part. So he's saying, hey, I don't understand what's going on with these waters in the above the firmament, which he believes is the heaven above the earth. But he's saying, look, scripture says they're there. We can't deny that. So that really there. And I don't know how, unless you believe you have waters all around the spherical earth. That's he's saying, hey, there's waters above. But then there's some other portions here which give a lot more context to his views. So this is taken here. Luther is writing. This is from his part 3, God's work on the third day. And so this is what Luther says. He says, Moses now calls the earth dry on account of the removal of the original waters from it. Thus we behold the waters of the oceans rage and boil as if they would swallow up the whole earth. For the ocean stands higher than the earth, but it cannot pass its appointed bounds. For this spot of dry land circumscribes the earth of the first creation and even opposes an insuperable barrier to the ocean waters. Hence, Job 38 chapter, the 38th chapter and the 104th Psalm bear witness to that, although the sea is higher than the earth and is limited by no boundaries of its own, yet it cannot pass its boundaries appointed by God. For the earth being the center of the world, that's the dry land he's talking about, the center of the world, would naturally be submerged and covered with the sea. God keeps back the sea by his word and thus makes the plane of the earth stand forth out of the waters as far as is necessary for the habitation and life of man. So that sounds like a flat plane of the earth, water surrounding it. And then he continues. Hence it is by the power of God that the waters are prevented from rushing in upon us. God therefore performs for us to this day and will do so to the end of the world. The same miracle which he wrought for the children of Israel in the Red Sea, Exodus 14 verses 21 and 22. But he made a special manifestation of his power by working the mighty miracle on that occasion to the intent that he might bind that people who are few in number the more devotedly to his worship. And what else is this our life upon the earth but a passage through the Red Sea, where the high and threatening walls of water stand up on each side of us? For it is most certainly true that the sea is much higher than the earth. God therefore to this day commands the waters to hang suspended and holds them up by his words that they may not break in upon us as they burst upon the world at the deluge. Sometimes, however, signs of God's power are still manifested. Whole islands perish under the waters, whereby God shows that the mighty water is still in his hands, and it is with him either to hold it fast or let it rush in upon the wicked and the ungrateful. Then continuing on, we're almost there. But he says, philosophers have their disputes concerning the center of the world and the circumfluent water. The word circumfluent means surrounding water. So he's saying the earth, once again, is the center of the world and then the surrounding water. And then he says, it is indeed it is wonderful that they go so far as to determine the earth to be the center of the whole creation. And it is from this argument that they conclude that the earth cannot fall, because it is supported from within by the other spheres surrounding it on every side. Hence, according to these philosophers, the heaven and all other spheres rest upon this center, by which they support themselves and also derive their durability. It is well becoming us to know these arguments, but these philosophers know not that the whole stability rests upon the power of the Word of God. Although therefore, the Water of the mighty ocean is higher than the earth, yet it cannot pass the appointed bounds nor cover the earth. But we live and breathe as the children of in the midst of the Red Sea. And don't be confused there by what he's saying about these other spheres resting around the center. You may see, oh, is he saying the earth is a sphere and these other spheres? Because listen to what he says next. That's going to clarify that. See, he's saying the dry land or the earth is the center, and you got the water surrounding it. And he's saying God's holding back the waters from flooding over the earth. But then here, listen to this. This is also very helpful. He says Moses here adds the divine accommodation, although nothing was wrought beside the divisions of waters, in bringing out of waters a small particle of the earth. Now above the most beautiful part of God's creation in this short divine commendatory sentence was not added. Perhaps it was omitted as an intimation from God that he is more concerned about our habitation than his own, and that he might by such intimation animate for us higher feelings of gratitude and praise. For we were not destined to exist in the air or in the heaven, but on that's fine, but on the earth where we were appointed to support our life by day and drink. But then listen to this part, guys. This is the kicker right here. He says, therefore, after God adorned the roof of man's habitation, namely the heaven, and added the light, he now spreads its floor and makes the earth suitable for the dwelling service of men. This part of the work God twice declares to be good on our account, by which he would intimate that we men form so great a part of his care, that he is desirous to assure us by such a twofold approbation of this portion of his creation work wrought with so great a manner that he would ever hold it under his peculiar protection, and that he would grant it his perpetual presence, and would prevent from our great enemy and our most certain death the mighty water from rushing in upon us. Beautifully, therefore, did God form in the beginning the foundation and roof of this house. Now let us see how he furnished and garnished it. So he's saying heaven is the roof, the earth is the floor, and he called the waters the sides of the house. Yeah, so that's just really important, because that is exactly what he's saying. Yeah, right here. Let me read this part again. Therefore, after God adorned the roof of man's habitation, namely the heaven, and added the light, he now spreads its floor and makes the earth, once again, the dry land, suitable for the dwelling service of man. This part of his work. And then right here, he says this again too. Let me read this part here. He says, God, as we have seen, has now constructed the first and the principal parts of man's house. Its roof, the heaven, is the most beautiful, but it is not fully adorned. Its foundation is the earth. Its walls are the mighty waters on every side. And then he says, God makes provision for our food. He commends the earth to bring forth herbs and trees and to bear fruit of every kind. Here you may see why the earth was therefore called tohu and bohu, because it was not only yet dark, but altogether barren of fruit. So he's illustrating this as a house, and he's saying the plane of the earth is the center of it, the waters are the sides of it, and the heaven is the roof of it. That's the description that we're talking about. So that gives you a lot of insight. Now, how he understands these spheres of the heavens moving around, he even gets into how he even speculates how he views a lunar eclipse at one point. There is some confusion about how Luther's articulating everything, but he's not articulating this Ptolemaic or Aristotelian sphere. That's what Faulkner wants us to just he's making assumptions, or he's not being intellectually honest. There's inaccuracies, and I think what we've seen with his views of Augustine, Aquinas, and Luther, we've seen that he can be demonstrably proven to be wrong on these 3 points. So that's, guys, where I'm really going to leave it for this episode. I think that really shows where we need to leave things at this point. There's a lot more I could say on this. I know that this was a lot of quotations. I know it was a little bit more meaty or awkward in that sense. I mean, not awkward. It was a lot more reading quotations, which is a little bit harder to follow. But I really wanted to demonstrate that you can take excerpts from this book and people will assume that it's facts. And then if you go to these very same source materials, like Luther's commentary on Genesis or Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, you can say, hey, wait a minute. And so that's what happens. You kind of get a tyranny of the experts here. Like you say, oh, he's done all this research and this seems to be trustworthy. You can say, oh, they debunked this viewpoint. But when you go a little bit deeper, you can see that there's more to the story than what's going on here. So I hope this has been helpful. I know that I didn't even get into, I could get into his scriptural arguments. I could get into more of the other stuff. I can't guarantee I might do a part 2 to this at some point. So if that's something you guys want, like, please let me know in the comments. I'm willing to do that if that's something worth covering. But I hope all this has been helpful today as we've tried to go through a little bit of Danny Faulkner's book and interact with some of his historical arguments. So all that being said, guys, this is Joe Harper with Reformed Truther Ministries. God bless everybody. If you have been blessed by the ministry of RTM, then please consider supporting our ministry and check out our website at www.reformedtruther.com.